about 100 pages, 60 pages plus of text, and then there's a number of exhibits and data and lots of information that you may enjoy. Quickly, just for those of you who might not be familiar with Baltimore Development Corporation, though I think most of you are, BDC for short, because we all need three-letter acronyms here. We are the city's lead economic development organization. I say organization because we're not technically a city agency, but we're very closely aligned and affiliated with the city. But technically, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization contracted to the city. The mayor nominates our board members, and most of our budget comes from the city of Baltimore. So that's how we end up being quasi. Our mission really is to grow the city's economy. And now we're more focused on doing that in an inclusive way. And so we're focused on most importantly, retaining the businesses that we have, helping those that are here expand, and then attracting new businesses. And then, of course, working with many of you to promote investment in the city and hopefully increase the career opportunities for city residents. So just on this slide, I just had a couple of facts and figures from the last fiscal year, just to give a sense of the size and scope of work that we do. In our, I'll say normal, whatever that is today, our normal operations, our normal programs, we've helped about 145 businesses last year. We did almost 40 facade improvement grants. We did 11 business loans, and we helped create or retain about 1,500 jobs. Most of what we've been doing over the last two years now, almost 2 years, as expected, has been focused on economic recovery, stability and recovery through COVID-19. And so we've launched a whole series of programs over the last year and a half to address that. And through those programs, we've assisted another 2,000 plus businesses. We've issued about $16 million in program assistance. Most of that is direct grants to small businesses. We've probably done over 1,600 of those small business grants. And then we had a program called Design for Distancing that some of you may have participated in, which was spread out across 16 different commercial districts across the city. So a lot of the BDC's focus has been focused on small business assistance to help businesses survive and hopefully in some cases expand during the pandemic. But today what I wanted to focus on is our new strategy, relatively new strategy, although it's been going on for a while. So I know some of you have participated in what we now call Baltimore Together. But in October, we issued the final report, and now we are entering into the implementation phase, although we've been implementing as we can implement over the last year or so. Even as we've been building the plan, we've been trying to check off action items. So what is Baltimore Together? This is serving as our comprehensive economic development strategy, which is called a CEDS in our language. And a CEDS is a federal designated plan, and it's required by the federal government, specifically EDA, the Economic Development Administration, to be eligible for funds, which is now very important. It was important before, but there's more emphasis now with all the federal funding coming through the Build Back Better plan. So this is something that we must do. But when we started this CEDS plan, which is done roughly every 5 years, so it's been about 7 years since the last one, I was also coming into this position as president CEO of BDC, and so I took the opportunity to make our CEDS plan much bigger than what has been done before, and much broader, and really use it to not only create the city's plan, but also align what BDC is working on, and then hopefully bring as many partners together to work on sort of one big vision. And so Baltimore Together is that public-private partnership. And for those of you who did participate from the beginning of this, which took about 2 years now to complete it, you'll know that we started with a vision of inclusive economic development and inclusive growth. And we had promised to folks that we would make it specific, we would make it measurable, and that we would also hold ourselves accountable. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we plan to do that. And then, of course, this initiative is also very much aligned with the mayor, who's endorsed the plan, as well as the city council, who have participated in the program. We'll be hopefully going to city council this year to formally adopt the plan. And then in November, I know Sean Davis is on as the chair of the Baltimore City Planning Commission. The Planning Commission adopted this formally in November. So I'll talk a little bit about the vision, but before I do, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the differences between Baltimore Together and prior CEDS plans. I may have mentioned a few of those already, but one is that we're very much focused in this 5-year plan on racial equity. It's something that has been an issue in Baltimore for decades, but it's not something that we've ever addressed, at least not in a very defined and holistic way in a comprehensive economic development strategy. And so that was one of the key differences. 2, we try to engage as many people as possible in this process. We did complete a fair amount of work before the pandemic, which will give you a sense of how long we've been doing this. But then, as we went virtual, we really tried to include as many people as possible, including younger voices and the innovators of today. I talked a little bit about accountability already, and I'll show that towards the end. And we also tried not to reinvent the wheel. So a lot of what we came up with in terms of the product delivery, and also as we move forward with implementation, we borrowed from other CEDS plans that had been done successfully. And one in particular was LA County, Propel LA, which we stole some of their ideas on from and are included in this. So we went through the vision in detail, and this was created, I think Ernst Valery's on, and he participated in one of our equity and inclusion committees, which pretty much drafted this vision statement. And it was done in the summer of 2020, shortly after the murder of George Floyd and racial protests, et cetera. And so, this was a difficult exercise, but one that I think was certainly worth the time to go through, and is very focused. And so there's sort of 3 sentences to it. I won't read you the whole thing, but I'll just point out a couple key phrases. The first bullet really is talking about the fact that we want to be a world-class city, and that we want to create the playbook for how to create a urban economy based on diversity, equity, inclusion, resiliency. And so we call out the fact that we need to lift up historically excluded Baltimoreans, mainly our African-American community, while also attracting new people, new businesses, new investments, but people who are committed to this vision. So we're really kind of focused on those who want to align with the goals of the city and the community. Secondly, we call out the city's history of racialized economic disinvestment and the fact that we've had systemic racism in Baltimore City. It's not necessarily unique to Baltimore City, but it is part of our history and something that we have to address, and its impact, particularly on Black residents, but also on the greater community. And then last, we talk about making sure that we include and lift up opportunities for people of color in economic growth, and not just in some of the sectors that are more service-based, restaurants, other small businesses, but in our high growth sectors as well. So technology, life sciences, logistics, and that's really aiming to build generational wealth in communities of color, which have traditionally not seen that generational wealth growth over time. So that's the vision of Baltimore Together in a nutshell. And I'll walk through our goals and strategies. But before I do those, I'll talk a little bit about some of the key findings that drove the discussions and the work. And so there were 6 key findings, and it was sort of a mixed bag of things that were opportunities and things that were challenges. And so the first key finding, looking at Baltimore City's economy, was that before COVID-19, Baltimore's economy was growing at a competitive pace, both in terms of the region as well as some of our peer cities. So we were seeing growth, which a lot of times, people say, "Oh, Baltimore is continuing to decline." Not true in terms of job creation. We've been hit harder than other areas of the state in terms of our economy due to COVID, mainly because we have a large tourism hospitality sector. And so, of course, our hotels and restaurants have been impacted by COVID. We also have a large number of hospitals and universities, which are also fairly impacted by COVID, hospitals being in terms of staffing shortages. Again, that's not just unique to Baltimore, that's a national trend. And then universities having to deal with online classes and going virtual and losing enrollment, et cetera. And so that's why Baltimore, I think, stands out a little bit in Maryland in terms of COVID. But then we've also seen bright spots. So logistics, warehousing, e-commerce has exploded in Baltimore City, as well as life sciences and research dollars are pouring in to startup companies, et cetera. The second bullet here is city's population is becoming more educated, with more people earning higher incomes. So we've seen a shift in the demographics of the city, also more typically younger as well. We think that bodes well for the economy overall. The third point here is this came out during the census as we were doing this strategic plan, but we've seen population loss, but we've also seen an increase in households. And so what that means is we've seen more singles and couples sort of moving into the city, which is driving up the households. But overall, we're seeing a decline in larger households, mainly families, especially in the middle class, Black middle class, who are moving out of the city. So again, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Our goal is to grow the population and increase households, and so that's what this plan focuses on. And then the 33 challenges, I'll actually do the last 2 first because they're related and go back to this issue of equity. But these were not necessarily surprising. One is that racial disparities are wide, so there's a huge gap between Black and white residents in terms of income and employment. And then that's mirrored on the business side, which we have, about half of the businesses or more in the city are owned by minority people of color, but only 12% of the revenue that's generated is from businesses that are minority owned. So you see that disproportionate number there of most of the revenue going to white-owned businesses. And so our plan is to work to address that. And then the last bullet here, that I'm going to talk about, which is really the 4th bullet, is that job growth was largely dependent, or has been largely dependent, on large companies and institutions. And so we've seen that virtually all of the job growth over the last 10 years has been in organizations or businesses over 500 people, which is an anomaly, and it's not a good thing. It shows that our small business climate needs a lot more work in terms of helping businesses succeed as well as grow. And so a lot of the plan focuses on how to address that small business issue, and again, focusing on businesses owned by entrepreneurs, people of color. So it was a long process, as I talked about. It's about 2 years. We had 30 different work groups. We had a couple hundred people participate. That doesn't even include all of the public comments that we got on the final draft. And all of this led to essentially 7 overarching goals. And I'll go through these a little bit in more detail towards the end. So I'm just going to sort of put them on the screen so that you can see them. Build an equitable economy, be a world-class leader in key sectors, build a thriving innovation and small business ecosystem, build a stronger workforce, grow the city's population, support equitable neighborhood development, and recover stronger from COVID. Those are the 7 key goals that we're focused on. And as we go through the slides, I'm going to talk about what that exactly means and how we plan to measure that. And then we came up with 4 overarching strategies. And so if you have time to read the full report, which is available at baltimoretogether.com, you'll see that we've used these strategies to kind of weave together achieving those 7 goals. And so the strategies that we have, which really came from the feedback that we got through different work sessions, are as follows. The first one, and it's number 1 for a reason, because we heard this time and time again, is work together. And so this is really working to bring different groups together. There's a lot of great work that's happening in Baltimore City. There's a lot of great work that's happening regionally, but they tend to be happening in silos. And so we believe that, the whole will be greater than the sum of the parts if we can do a better job at fostering collaboration and telling our story in a way that is more impactful. And so there's a whole series of recommendations that focus on how we can work together across different disciplines, whether it's economic development, workforce development, community development, et cetera. The second strategy is to invest in people and places. And so the summary here is that we need to create access to resources for everybody, and focusing in particularly on workforce and education, and making sure that everyone has equal opportunities. And then the invest in places is a little bit different in that it's less of a citywide strategy and it's more of a strategic strategy. And so we took the community development framework plan, which our Department of Housing and Community Development issued maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and we included that in our plan. And so there's 4 priority investment areas that kind of that is comprised of a number of neighborhoods. And so that's really where BDC and economic development want to align our investments and our work with the community development work that's happening in areas. You can't invest everywhere. We just don't have the resources. And so we want to really invest in those areas that we think have market viability. And then the third and fourth strategy essentially go together. And so the third one is to build from strength. So there's a number of key industry sectors highlighted in the report. I mentioned a few already: life sciences, logistics, advanced manufacturing. We also focused on 2 kind of emerging or at least new industry sectors that from the last time we did this report, I think weren't as pronounced or weren't as rich as they are now. And that's one, the creative industries, whether that's local makers or artists or digital artists, et cetera, can include. There's a number of architects on the call. Those types of industries, creative sector, which is growing here in Baltimore, and then also social entrepreneurship. There's a number of social entrepreneur programs in the city, and we see Baltimore becoming very attractive for young innovators that want to do well in terms of building a business, but also want to do good in terms of contributing to overall benefit to society. And then the fourth strategy is really compete to succeed, and what that means is trying to address our competitive imbalances. So we know we have issues with public safety. We have issues with access to public education for certain segments of the population. We have a very high property tax rate for the real estate developers on the call. We have an older and often failing infrastructure system. We have a lack of comprehensive transit system. These are all issues that we know we've had for a while, and we've got to address them, but they probably have to be addressed over time. So with that, I want to talk about the metrics. And so in terms of accountability, one of the concerns that people have when you do a large kind of vision and strategic plan is, well, what's going to happen, once you finish putting it together. And so we developed a whole series of metrics. This is sort of the high level dashboard, if you will, for each goal. And so this will be available publicly. We're going to be building out the Baltimore Together website, and we're going to be updating this annually at a minimum. To the extent that we can update it more frequently, we will. But we want to be very clear about what our goal is, what the goal means, and then what metric we're going to use to hold ourselves accountable for progress or success. And so for the first goal that I touched on, build an equitable economy, what does that really mean? For us, it means eliminating the economic racial disparities. And specifically what we're going to measure is Black income and employment versus white income and employment. And so the goal is to get that gap to 0. I forget the current gap now, but it's almost 30 to 40% difference in those areas. And so we'll be updating this, and hopefully over 5 years we'll see that gap, if not eliminated, which may be overly ambitious, at least drastically reduced. For goal 2, we'll be measuring employment within these key sectors, so life sciences, logistics, digital services, and creative industries. And so the goal there is to see employment increase, which will mean that there's business growth or new businesses happening. And again, there will be sort of sub metrics focusing on the number of people of color in those industries as well. So as we grow these key sectors in Baltimore, we want to make sure that we're growing in a way that's providing opportunity to all of Baltimoreans. 3 is focusing on innovation and small business ecosystem. And so the specific metric here is looking at the total revenue of BIPOC, that's Black, Indigenous, people of color owned businesses compared to white businesses. As I mentioned, 12% of the revenue is generated by BIPOC businesses, with the remaining 88% going to white owned businesses. We want to see that equal in terms of proportion. So if half of the businesses are owned by BIPOC owned businesses and half are white owned, we'd want to see the same split in terms of revenue. Build a stronger workforce system. We'll be looking at the employment rate in communities of color, which tends to be much higher, especially among African American men. We want that to be more normalized across the board. 5th is grow the city's population. So again, this is looking at the number of residents and households. Number 6, increase investment or support equitable neighborhood development, What that means is increasing investment in formerly redlined, disinvested communities. And so we'll be tracking the dollar amount of public and private investment, mainly in those 4 impact areas that have already been identified by the city. And then lastly, recover stronger from COVID. And this is focusing on those most impacted industries, trying to get back, if not further along in terms of their growth, primarily tourism, hospitality. So what's next? So as I mentioned, we finished the plan. It was issued last year. We're beginning to work on implementation. This is not a BDC plan. This is a City of Baltimore plan. And so that means we want everybody involved in moving it forward. At the end of the report, which I didn't go through in detail today, is an implementation matrix. So I think there's about 80 different specific action items that are listed in the report that need to be done. And so I kind of refer to it as the sign-up sheet. We invite you to look at that, figure out if your organization or you personally or groups that you might be involved with are working on those issues or actions, and feel free to reach out and can either take the lead or be supportive, but it's not something that we at BDC can do alone. There's a number of them that we are the lead on. Most of them we're not the lead on, and so we're looking for partners to help push implementation. What we're committed to do is hire a staff person that will be dedicated to focus on Baltimore Together. Too often we do these plans, they're great strategies, and then 6 months later we forget about them, or priorities change. We're committed to following this through over the next 5 years, and we're going to hire someone to do that. Two, we're expanding the website. I talked about that to have very specific dashboards and real-time updates. Three, which is something I'm super excited about, although with COVID, hopefully we can still do this, but we'd like to do an annual summit focused on economic community development in Baltimore. There's other groups that are doing, interested in doing similar kind of summits. And so maybe the idea is to bring all those together, hence Baltimore Together, and have a big conference and invite the public to talk about where we're headed. And then we need some help. We could use some additional help with public engagement, making people know that this is out there, and then also helping to tell our story about Baltimore and the work that's being done here. Oftentimes it's overshadowed by not so great news. And then last, we're seeking support for help us with convenings and research. And as I mentioned, the matrix and helping us implement many of the actions that are outlined in the report. So with that concludes it. Again, you can find all the information at baltimoretogether.com, and I'll go ahead and stop sharing and happy to answer any questions that anybody has.
Thanks, Colin.
I know it was a lot to throw at you in a short period of time, so.
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
You started with a vision statement, which was a very nice one, but I wondered, in formulating that, was there any thought about examples around the world that are models, aspirational models, would like to be like them?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. I don't think there is one city that has done equitable economic development right yet. Maybe we'll be the first. I think we looked at cities. One was Portland, which gets a good mark for its inclusive prosperity. Although when you look at the ratio of the demographics, I should say, it's very different than Baltimore.
Right.
But I think the ideas that they had are great, and so we tried to use some of those strategies. We also looked at like cities that haven't done a great job, not necessarily because they were not trying to. It's just Austin, Nashville. I think San Francisco. A lot of those cities have grown so fast they've become unaffordable, whereas Baltimore, it's like I don't know if it's good or bad, right? It's, we haven't grown as fast as some of these other cities, even DC, to just to the south of us, where they all have affordability issues. We're still affordable in Baltimore, and so we kind of have this opportunity to get ahead of the curve, but we also want to see economic growth. So to answer your question, we did look at a series of cities. What I've said is it's easier to look at almost like specific issues and take a best practice from each city as opposed to just look at one city as the model. It's usually kind of like what you can borrow and steal from a variety of sources.
Sure. Thanks.
Sure.
I had a question I put in the chat, but how much more effective or less effective would you say that BDC has been as a 501c3 organization rather than as a unit of government? And also, apart from BDC and Arundel Community Development Services, are you aware of other 501c3 organizations in Maryland or elsewhere that have substituted for traditional governmental agencies?
Yeah, so I'll take the first part of the question. It gives us more flexibility. So I have worked on the city side, obviously. So I worked in the mayor's office. So you're subject to all the different HR, procurement, et cetera. BDC kind of lives on both sides of it. So we follow all the different sunshine laws, so Public Information Act, open meetings. We follow the city's ethics law. So, I follow disclosure. And I think all that's good in terms of transparency. Where BDC is more effective is, I don't have to go through a long procurement process to, hire a writer or this or that. So there's just a lot of flexibility. We're not my team here, we're all at will employees. Well, technically I'm a contract, but everyone else here can be fired at will. And so it just gives us a lot of flexibility in hiring and that type of thing. So I like kind of the mix of it. And I think it's served BDC well. Oftentimes we're kind of the go-to to get things done, because I'll have my colleagues who are on the city side say, is there any way BDC can do this for us? Because it's going to take me, 3 months to get through, this, that, and the other. Every economic development agency is set up a little bit differently. It sometimes depends on the size of the organization. If you're a smaller organization, sometimes it might just be more effective to be part of an administration. But there's a whole range. Some are 501c6s because they raise money. Some are private public partnerships. We, as I mentioned, are pretty much 100% funded by the city. We also have some of our own revenue, if you will, through loan fees and that type of thing. So in that way, we're not like a membership organization, and we're not beholden to any sort of private sector interests. We can fundraise, and we have ethics approval to do that. But it's kind of nice having the funding that's generally reliable in terms of the city funding us and not being beholden to other interests outside of city government. At the same time, it's nice to have a little bit of autonomy and not be bogged down by lots of different bureaucratic rules.
I wondered whether, now that you have this plan, whether you can point to a few ongoing activities that sort of are the bread and butter of BDC, and how they were informed by the plan and how they are different now than from before. One example would be the planning department does put the CIP together, and in that they have already started to measure investments in disadvantaged communities versus white communities, and whether you are assisting in making that more equitable. And then secondly, you do a lot of the disposition lots and the investments, and which ones you put out for RFP. Is this different now? Are you investing more in disadvantaged communities than before?
The short answer is we are trying to. I would say that we're becoming more aware and more intentional in tracking that, and making sure that there's a balance between development that might be, in downtown or areas where there's more economic activity, which tends to be the case, right? Like we tend to get involved in helping the private sector. That's really been more BDC's role as we've evolved, as opposed to BDC in the past, it was a little bit more like we're going to acquire property and take on a development project. I think we've been doing more of a supportive role. That said, we've been trying to be conscious of where we prioritize our time and making sure that that's distributed. If you look at the work that we've done, most of it actually is in neighborhoods. It's not reported on as much because it just doesn't hit the headlines. So, working with Ernst and Station North and in Pigtown, like those headlines aren't as big as, Port Covington or something of that nature. So when you look at the number of projects, they're distributed much more widespread than you might think, including our CIP and our loans and everything. But the bigger projects tend to happen in areas where there's a lot more momentum. So the difference, I think someone put in there talking about Pimlico, so we're super excited. We view that much as less about the racetrack and more about the expansion of Park Heights. And so our CIP is starting to align with where we want to see projects. We're trying to allow work on Pennsylvania Avenue, for example, and we've been successful getting funding through the CIP to invest in that. I also wear the hat of the public market, so we've been working on Hollins Market and Avenue Market. We've finished a lot of the other markets that have more market traction. So it is informing. I would say that the Baltimore Together plan has informed more of our programmatic work in a lot of ways than people sort of look at BDC as real estate. Most of what we do is really small business assistance. And so what we've been able to launch with the ARPA funds is a small business technical assistance network. And so that whole vision really grew out of Baltimore Together. I already mentioned the fact that we wanted to focus on small businesses, and I wanted to focus on, in particular, businesses owned by people of color. We knew that they were going to be the groups that fell through in terms of COVID. And so one of the big decisions that we made during COVID, which was informed by a lot of the work that we had done through Baltimore Together, was that all of our grant programs have been based on need versus based on first come, first serve. If you look at most of the grant programs that rolled out initially through other cities, Philadelphia, state of Maryland, they were all first come, first serve. We actually waited and sort of wanted to see what happened, and what happened was what we assumed would happen, which was the resources went to those who were first in line, which tended to be more resource businesses, businesses with employees, businesses who had ADP as their payroll provider, and the businesses that missed out were people that didn't have their books together, sole proprietors, businesses that relied on family members for employees, basically under-resourced businesses. And so we decided not to do it that way at all. And so we opened up our grant period for 2 to 3 weeks, and we said, we want you to apply. We want you to call us for help. We'll help you through your applications, et cetera, et cetera. And so the long and short of it is that most of our, about 2/3 of our grants went to minority-owned businesses, businesses owned by city residents, and more than half were owned by women. And so, those demographics, those would have probably been, much different if we had done it first come, first serve. And so that's informed us as we've taken the small business network to the next level. The network part of it is that we're working with 18 organizations across the city. BDC's leading it. And those organizations, 10 of them are grassroots organizations that are in the neighborhoods, all of which are led by people of color. So they're helping us do the outreach and do connections. And then the other 8 or so are service providers who are providing the more technical assistance aspects of it, helping people with PPP, helping people with other aspects. And so that whole network, that the idea of working together, that came out of Baltimore Together, the idea of focusing on small minority-owned businesses, using grassroots partners, all of that's kind of come out of sort of this vision that we've had. I don't think we would have maybe come to those conclusions or been able to stand up those programs as quickly and as equitably as we had we not kind of had this strategic vision.
Stuart Steinman had sent a message to me to pass on to you. What is being done to train young people in jobs where there is a shortage of skilled labor, and particularly with regard to community colleges and vocational high schools?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I probably can't answer it thoroughly enough. So my counterpart is Jason Perkins Cohen, and he heads up the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. And so the Employment Development Workforce Development Agency is they're focused on, working with the school system and the community colleges. So there's a whole workforce investment board that prioritizes funding, primarily WIOA funding, which comes from the federal government to do that. So I'm not the best one to ask Jason. That's really kind of his expertise.
I've got a question about the challenges we still have downtown, and BDC traditionally was the kind of main actor in trying to get some of this stuff to happen, but we have problems with Harbor Place. Mechanics site is sitting empty for I don't know how many years, and I think the super block is supposed to be getting some motion after 20 years or so sitting around. Is BDC got a strategy for tackling some of those things to help us reinforce the downtown? Or with all these things that are being spread across your plate, how are you going to be able to reinforce some of these?
Yeah, you just have to do it all, right?
Exactly.
So I would say, so I have a little bit different take on the downtown. I don't subscribe to the doom and gloom. I just subscribe to the fact that it's transitioning. So from BDC's role, we worked closely with downtown with the Waterfront Partnership in this case to do the new Rash Field project, which is super successful. I mean, I haven't been by yet and not seen a lot of people using it. And so there was a lot of talk about, oh, the Inner Harbor, the city's forgotten about it, et cetera. I mean, that's a new, I think it was close to $15 million investment. Hopefully we can do phase two. And there's a ton of people there. So the idea that people aren't visiting the harbor, I don't get that. People not visiting Harbor Place, yeah, they're not, because there's nothing there.
Right.
So Harbor Place and the Mechanic, you mentioned those two. I mean, they're privately owned sites. Harbor Place is in receivership. We have virtually no say or anything. We have no say in that. So that one, I mean, those two are almost just waiting games. Howard Brown hasn't done squat on Mechanic. We've thrown code enforcement at him, but unfortunately, he got the demo permit. He's demoed it. He's secured the site. He's a private owner. There's not a lot that we can do to work with, frankly, an uncooperative property owner. And maybe there's strategies, but on the positive side, BDC has been focused on the west side for a number of years that have been stalled. We're down to just a handful of properties left, which is great news. We've seen a lot of small scale development, and now we're seeing a lot of larger scale development. So the arena is probably the largest project that will kick off next month. So that'll be a new $200 million private investment that I think is going to both invigorate the facility in terms of getting probably twice as many, or maybe 50% more events there, and then also working to really clean up Hopkins Plaza and make it a better public space. So that's going to be a key new anchor, and that's something that's been looked at for the last 10, 20 years as well, and now we are moving forward. Lexington Market is the other exciting one, so that's well under construction. That'll open this July. And then the third one, I call it the third one because I call these three the trifecta: Arena, Lexington Market, and then you mentioned the super block. So we carved the super block up. So half of the super block is now under the control of Landmark, Mason-Dixon, and Chris Janian. So they're working through their entitlement process. They still have more approvals to get through with CHAP, but hopefully by the end of this year, they'll have all of their entitlements for design, and hopefully they'll be able to get their financing for that. It's a mixed use project, about $150 million is what's planned. It'll be phased over time. I think there's 3 phases, starting with apartments, and then the last phase is a hotel. And then the other piece of the super block, parts of that have been developed, and we've issued RFPs for remaining parcels. But we've seen a lot of small scale development. The 400 block of Howard Street, for example, kind of half the block was blighted. That's all been redone with apartments above small businesses. The small businesses I think we have 4 businesses there, which are all Black-owned businesses, and they're doing well despite COVID. They've opened in the last year or so. And then this is new news, which is that the Chris Janian's group closed on Park Avenue, which is the 400 block of Park Avenue project that BDC controlled and sold to them just south of 520 Park Avenue, 500 Park Avenue. They just closed on their financing last week. So we're starting to see a lot of traction on the west side. And I think that's going to start to fill in the gap. So once Harbor Place comes out of receivership, I'm pretty optimistic that there's going to be plans for that, and that'll go through a whole, exciting process and reinvigorate that. But I feel like the pieces of downtown are starting to fill in. We've seen so much in terms of residential conversions from office. I think we've added like 4,000 units in downtown. So I think it's kind of filling in some of these larger projects, as you've mentioned, but then making sure that these smaller projects continue to happen as well.
Colin, this is Mike Cordes. I'll read a few of the questions that have popped up in the chat room. Joe Nathanson asks, how does Baltimore Together support efforts to make the city welcoming to immigrants and refugees?
Yeah, so we worked with Mayor's Office of Immigrant and Multicultural Affairs. Catalina Rodriguez heads up that office, and so there's a section in there focused on new Americans. New Americans and immigrants tend to be more inclined for entrepreneurship and small business. And so I think in the recommendations we have is continuing Catalina's work, but making sure that we have language assistance. In terms of practical things, one of the surprises that we had, although maybe we shouldn't have been as surprised as we were, but when we issued our grants for COVID, we had a huge need for language assistance, and not just Spanish, but Korean, Chinese, a whole number of foreign languages. I think we ended up at like 10 or 15% of our grantees, were non-English first speaking language. And so Baltimore's done fairly well. If you look at the census data as well, the larger segments of growth in terms of demographics are in immigrants. So it's a focus for us. We want to help both attract immigrants to the city, and then also make sure that they have resources if they want to be small business owners and entrepreneurs. So we touch on that, but again, we're trying to convene all of these different players. So similar to workforce, Catalina is really kind of the lead in terms of immigrant and refugee, and making sure that BDC is there to help where we can in terms of the business aspect of it.
Great. Matt Kimball asks, with a good start now on Pimlico, can you advise us to the status of an expanded convention center and the renovation of the Mitchell Courthouse East?
Yeah, I can't talk at the Mitchell. I don't know where that stands, to be honest. I know there's been sort of different concepts, but I don't think that they've ever been able to get the level of funding that's required to either renovate and or relocate the courthouse. So I don't know of any traction on that, and I may just not know, but I don't think anything's happening of substance there. And then the convention center piece of it, frankly, with COVID, that sort of has been put on pause. The numbers were also pretty astronomical for some of the other plans that have been talked about. I think we're looking at now is probably a more modest renovation of the existing structure as opposed to a large tear down. But MSA, Maryland Stadium Authority, is basically the lead for the convention center project, and so we've been in talks with them about potentially going to the General Assembly this session to see what might be available. But I think both of those are
A little late, my friend.
It's only January. I mean, we've been having those conversations with the General Assembly for a while, but I don't know if we're ready, frankly, for such a large ask. The price range is anywhere from, on the low end, just to kind of renovate and place 700 million, to tear down and build and expand is 1.2 billion. So economically, it's a challenge.
Okay. Laurie Putcher asks, what is the interface between Baltimore Together, the CIP, and the new federal infrastructure bill?
Well, so Baltimore Together and the CIP are well aligned. And so we prioritize our CIP ask in line with the initiatives in Baltimore Together. I don't know enough about the federal infrastructure bill to know if that has gotten anywhere close to the local level in terms of how any funding that might come through, I think MDOT, which is where I think the money from the feds goes to, how that might spill down into the city. So
A tough one. Well, you may want to join our meeting in April when Chris Shorter talks about the ARPA fund use.
yeah, I am involved in the ARPA fund use, but I think I'm not sure that's the same as the federal infrastructure bill. I think it's all under Build Back Better, but
A question that I ask is there any type of plan brewing to reduce the city's tax rates so as to make the city more attractive to new residents?
I mean, this is my soapbox. So we don't have a plan yet. I think it's part of Baltimore Together to figure out that plan. There's a number of people who have worked on it over the years and want to work on it. I think it's the one action and the one policy decision that will change the trajectory of the city. It just, the economics, the numbers don't work for all of those of you who are in development. are trying to do projects that the numbers don't work. And so we've fixed that with lots of different tax credit programs and other subsidies, but that's not a sustainable situation in my view. So we have to figure out how to fix it. But that also means that city government and city officials and policymakers also have to figure out how to spend less and invest more to get greater, revenue, and then over time reduce the property tax rate. So there's not a plan yet, but we need one, and my goal is to have that over the next 5 years.
I couldn't agree more. I think Rachel had a question.
Yeah. I wonder if you've made any progress on that goal of trying to have more minority businesses throughout the growth sectors, not just in a couple of ones. And if not, how do you plan to go about trying to achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, the plan is just a couple months old, so I don't think we've made any progress there. So there's a couple different initiatives. I don't know if the folks on this call are familiar with Upsurge, but Jamie McDonald, who the former T. Rowe Price exec and then turned entrepreneur, she's leading this program called Upsurge, which is a collection of local investments, so Brown Investment, T. Rowe, Friends and Family offices, Bishotti, others have formed this group, and so they're focused on what they call Equitech, which I can't really explain what that is, but it really means is more representation of founders of color in key growth sectors. Technology, life sciences tends to be their focus, including medtech. So we at BDC have been supporting a number of organizations that are exclusively led by people of color in high growth sectors. So we're funding Conscious Venture Labs, which is focused on sort of capitalism with a conscience is what they're focused on. So a little bit more on the social innovation side, but they have a range of companies. We're supporting Hutch, which is a digital services incubator, primarily for founders of color. It's out of Fearless, which is led by Dalali Daraga. Also the other half of he's married to the health commissioner, but he's African American, UMBC grad. He started a tech company. It's grown it to over 100 employees. They're power plant live. We're helping BCAN, which is Micah's Baltimore Creatives Accelerator Network. So they're primarily women and founders of color in the creative space. And we've also been focused on helping and funding Innovation Works, which is mostly rooted in different neighborhoods. I think they have 6 Ignite hubs in disinvested communities, and they're working with city residents who have ideas, again, a little bit more on the social impact.
I'm picking up my wife.
Sorry, James is. I can't mute him, but
She's on her. She just called, and she's.
But those are 4 organizations that are focused on startups that have a very deep equity component that we're helping, and then we've also been trying to just like lift up stories of founders of color in the city and help them attract venture capital. So there's a number out there raising funds. Sinavi Labs is one. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they make a device, a med tech device that's basically electronic stethoscope, which is kind of amazing that doesn't exist already. And so they're led by Ellington, and she's awesome. And so there's a lot of great stories that we have here in Baltimore on founders of color. And so just trying to lift them up, but then also attract capital. We're also on less on the maybe innovation side. We've also hired a technology firm that's owned by it's a mother and daughter, both African American, who have alternative underwriting so kind of opposed to a credit score, they issue a different type of score, which has been an impediment to our lending, especially for business owners of color. And so we're looking at that. We're looking at an alternative to just a credit score eliminating you. And so that's another way that we're kind of helping to address some of these equity issues.
Well, we're coming up on 1:30, and seeing no other questions in the chat room. I want to thank you, Colin, very much. That was a really interesting presentation.
Klaus had a question.
Oh, sorry. Shoot.
The convention center question, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is like pre-COVID, it actually wasn't too small. The convention centers have been getting larger and larger and larger, and we've been falling and falling and falling and losing conventions because they've outgrown us. So I don't think it is accurate to say that we weren't filling it, et cetera. I think post-COVID has given us a lot to think about, because my guess is conventions are going to be hybrid, like regardless of whether COVID dissipates or people get used to it. I think now that there's technology available and people are used to doing events like this, people are going to have the opportunity to do both virtual and in person. So, in some ways, it's great that we didn't design this, convention center and start construction, just before COVID, because I think things are going to change. What that means in terms of our convention center and the right square footage and how large the exhibit halls have to be, and I think we need to take a look at it, but we'll be able to, assuming we move forward with some sort of investment in the convention center, at least we'll be able to sort of start from a point of current, what the current climate is post-COVID. Well, thanks for having me. It was a great opportunity. Please visit the site. You can sign up for updates too on Baltimore Together. We don't send that many out, so you won't get too much spam from us. But if you want to keep up with what we're doing, please follow us. And if you want to get involved, please let me know.
Yeah.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you.
Yep.
You all.
That was a great presentation.